I have to say it feels a bit weird for me to actually see people, and still not over the starting to shake hands again. I prefer fist bumping, but Charles Morito, as the moderator mentioned, I lead government affairs and public policy at Google for Africa. And what I thought I would do, we're discussing future of work. And so what I wanted to do was do two things. One, give you a couple of statistics, and two, give you a framework. And hopefully that can just open up the conversation. Please feel free to ask me anytime, any questions. You can pause me. From my end, I know I work in government, but I'm easy, no protocols required. So the first data point that I wanted to share with you is that by 2050, more than a third of the world's workforce are going to be right here in Africa. I want to repeat that again because it blows my mind every single time I actually think about it. By 2050, more than a third of the world's workforce is going to be in Africa. So I have a young son, Bernd and I, our kids go to school together. My son is 2.5 years old. So by the time he's 30, at the peak of his career, more than a third of the world's workforce will be right here. So it's my duty and the duty of all of you in this room, the policymakers, etc., to start thinking about those 2-year-old children who are growing up, to start thinking, how are we preparing them to work and provide services to the rest of the world? And that's not sort of a line in the sand that once that year reaches, a switch flips. Just this year, we released a report called the Developer Ecosystem Report, which looked at how many software developers are actually in Africa today. That number is 720,000 developers on the continent, led by South Africa, Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria. Those are the ones with the highest number of developers. But what's interesting is not the 720. It's actually that 38% of all of those current developers work for companies outside Africa. So when you think about the future of work, it's not the future of work, it's actually work as it is, but it's going to continuously keep changing. We need to start thinking, how are we creating the right environment for people to start working right here on the continent? And then lastly, and I love data and data points, and I'm talking to at least a German organization, so I know you love your data and data points as well, is that by 2050, more than a quarter of the world's population are also going to be right here on the continent. So what we must start doing is creating an environment which is going to thrive, because with 25%, 2.5 billion people on the continent, you're either creating problems for the world or creating opportunities for the world. Africa's problems or success is the world's problems or success, right? Because you cannot lock up 2.5 billion people on one continent, right? I know that a couple of years ago, you had the migrant crisis of all the people trying to get to Europe. At that level of scale, people will get to Europe, people will get to the US and the rest of the world. So we need to create opportunities right here on the continent so that they can be able to actually build for themselves and earn a living in dignity. And so I want to give you a framework that we are working with, that we're socializing. And I hope that after this, you can take it, run with it, socialize it, and push it to all the policymakers that you work with. It's called the Digital Sprinters Report. And the thesis of this report is that by accelerating digital transformation, emerging markets can also see an explosion of growth in their economy. And there are 4 key pillars, which I will delve a little bit into 2, which rely on more on this, but really you can read up more on it on the blog post. If you search Google Digital Sprinters Report, it will come up and you can really look up and read it. So the four key pillars are, the first one is human capital. The second pillar is physical capital. The third is competitiveness. And last but not least is technological adoption. I want to focus on two. The one I want to start off with is human capital. The two that I won't delve too much into is technological adoption as well as physical capital. Physical capital really talks more about how do we start getting the right infrastructure to lower the access and improve connectivity across the continent. And then technological adoption is really just that. How do you get more sectors of society, of the economy, to really adopt technology so that they can grow? But let me delve a little bit more into human capital. What this is really about is creating the right skill sets across the board, not just digital skill sets, but the right skill sets across the board so that people can be able to start taking the jobs that are going to be coming up in the next 10, 15 years. Right now, if we take the US, for instance, there's an 11 million worker deficit in the number of jobs available today and the number of people who are actually looking for jobs, right? And a majority of those are actually technological jobs. So how do we start creating the right framework at school from kindergarten in essence, so that in the next 28 years, those people who are coming out of that, whether you're looking at the current CBC curriculum here in Kenya or similar curriculums that are being rolled out across the continent, how do we work very closely with governments to be able to start ensuring that we're thinking about not just the jobs that exist or that we think are going to exist, but actually creating people and graduates who can actually take jobs as they come, the jobs that we don't know that exist today. And really, it's about ensuring that we're creating lifelong learners who can adapt to the environment that's coming up really quickly. So that's on human capital. The second one that I want to touch on is around creating competitive spaces. And on this particular pillar, it's really about thinking through mostly policymakers, but really also regulators, etc. How do we work to ensure that the bills and the laws that are coming to play right now are really creating an Africa that's ready to work and provide services to the rest of the world? And I'll give you a couple of examples. In Ghana right now, we, as Google, just launched what we call it's a service center in collaboration with an organization called Majorel. And the thesis behind this is that in Africa today, you can be able to hire young, smart, educated people who can be able to do jobs that are servicing the rest of the world. And so we started that in Ghana. It's the first time Majorel has opened up an office in Ghana. And I hope that that is something that's going to set the tone for other organizations to follow suit and really grow those service jobs. Because what's interesting about it is that here in Kenya, for every single person that works, they support 14.6 lives. So think about the multiplier effect of that. So we need to think about it, not just for the jobs that we create, but the ripple effect that those jobs are creating across the board. But we need to have the right policies in place. Because in Ghana, for Majorel to open up that service center, we need work permits for a few people who need to come and train those Ghanaians. At the moment, we have 50 people there. And out of those, all of them are Ghanaian. But initially, we had a few people who had to come in and out to actually train and onboard and start helping those Ghanaians to really learn what is required and to service and deliver the right metrics that are required in the rest of the world. Because when a service center is opened up in Ghana, it's held to the same account as the one in India, the one in Philippines, in Poland, etc. Right? So we must make sure that The people are there. We have ease of access to create that level of skill sets and knowledge transfer that's required. The second piece I want to touch on beyond work permits is around the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. At the moment, we have a really interesting opportunity whereby we're discussing the digital protocol. On this, a couple of things are critical. One, cross-border data flows. I know privacy is something that we consistently discuss. However, most companies in Africa cannot survive at the scale that they need to if they're just within their borders. Let's take Twiga Foods, for instance, in Kenya. It's a fantastic company. It's now, I'm not sure how much it's valued at, but it's really about what, 5-6 years old, but employing hundreds of people and hopefully will be scaling beyond the shores of Kenya. If you don't have the right cross-border data flows allowed in terms of policy, that organization cannot go beyond the shores of Kenya. So we really need to be forward-thinking in terms of the policies, ensure we're working properly with the policymakers, and really try and avoid knee-jerk reactions, which sometimes happens because when you hear people say, I want my data to stay within my shores, the reality of it is that all of you, how many of you are from outside Kenya? Aha. You know, with data localization, your credit cards wouldn't work here, right? So it's really ensuring that we don't sort of fall into the whole political sort of knee-jerk reactions and pandering, and really look at the details of what actually needs to be done so that we can actually have an open society that enables free flow of travel, free flow of goods, and most importantly, free flow of people. I'll pause there because I know it's almost 10 minutes or maybe slightly more. But thank you, and we can open up later. But over to you.
Emmanuel, can you put on your video and mic?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect.
Okay, great. Are
Yes.
you going to go ahead without video?
For the sake of the good internet, let me
Okay.
first put on my video and then I will put it off while presenting.
All right. Great.
Okay.
You are? Yep. We can
Yes.
see you. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Please go
All right.
ahead. Mhm.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me and the Rwanda Development Board. As you said, I'm called Emmanuel Uwizeyimana. I'm currently working in Rwanda Development Board as Future Skills Development Analyst, where I'm in charge of undertaking skills forecasting to deliver and sustain long-term national development agenda, and also advise Rwanda Development Board on key priority sectors for short-term, medium, and long-term future skills development. Before joining the Rwanda Development Board, I served in the Ministry of Public Service and Labor on various positions, including Employment Policy and Labor Economist Specialist, Employment Policy Strategies and Programs Impact Specialist, and also as Director of Labor Research and Employment Promotion Unit. In the ministry, I led the development of national employment policy. I coordinated the labor force survey, among others. And also, before joining the ministry, I served in the Parliament of Rwanda as the statistician officer. I think in brief, this is Emmanuel Uwizeyimana, who is going to present about the future of work, specifically by focusing on Rwanda and Africa. I don't know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
That's good. Now, let me try to use the 10 minutes that has been given to me. In Rwanda, we have the target of becoming a middle-income country by 2035 and high-income country by 2050. And the skills and job are the core of the economic transformation. We know that to achieve this ambitious goal, Rwanda must build a dynamic and capable workforce that can meet the rising demand for high-skilled jobs for today and in the future. In our strategic plan, specifically in the National Strategy for Transformation from 2017 to 2024, we have a target of creating 1.5 million productive jobs and productive and decent jobs. This is around 214,000 per annum. In order to achieve this, the skills development and employment promotion are very critical and fall under the mandate of the Rwanda Development Board where I work, specifically in the department called Chief Skills Office where we ensure our skills are aligned with investors' needs and if the needs of the world that is changing. If we want to talk about skills and the future of work, we need to have in our mind like the 4 or the 3 factors impacting the skills in the world of work. One is about the rapid technology evolution. I think the previous speaker talked about that technology. We are having new technologies coming, robotics, artificial intelligence. Those are some of the factors that will impact the world of work even today and the future. This global socioeconomic trend, including demographics, increasing of population, migration from the rural area to the urban area, those will really impact our world of work in the future. The third factor is the shifting expectation of workers. And today you see employees are changing what they expect from their employers, and this will really affect what will be needed in the future. Reference made to the World Economic Forum report, especially the Future of Jobs report, shows us that 30% of jobs are at risk of displacement by automation by 2030. In 2030, about 85 million roles will be declined by 2025, and 97 million new roles will be emerged. This is shows that as we are having technology coming in place, we'll have jobs that will be missing or jobs that will be decreasing, but also we'll have other new emerging jobs that will be created due to technology. Let me talk about projection of jobs in Rwanda, specifically by economic activities, to see where our jobs of future in Rwanda will be concentrated. As you see on your screen, you see that jobs in agriculture, forest, and fishing will be decreasing from 2019 to 2024. But you can see the increase of jobs in ICT. You can see the increase of jobs in transport services. You can see the increase of jobs in construction. This shows where our country is putting much emphasis in job creation. ICT, construction, manufacturing, You can see, for example, manufacturing was at 80% be at 16% by 2024. It's a double of the jobs that will be created in manufacturing. In information technology, you can see that we're at 10% in 2019, but we are projecting to be at 20% in 2024, a double again. You see, by this table, you can see where we can put much emphasis as long as technology and the future of work is concerned. As long as we are approaching the future, we are trying to be ready for the future. We need to prepare our workforce in terms of skills, specifically in Rwanda, in Africa, and all over the world. The job of the future will require greater skills. As you can see on your screen, in 2017, let me take an example of the tourism sector, where the high-skilled people were estimated at 9%, skilled 42, low-skilled 85. But we are projecting to have in 2035 high-skilled 10%, skilled 80%. You can see that the low-skilled in tourism will decline from 4% to 3%. This shows that the work of the future will require skilled, capable workforce. Let me take another example. For example, ICT. You can see that in ICT, in 2017, we had like 33% of skilled people in ICT, 43 in skilled, and 24 in low skilled. But you can see that the skilled will come from 43% to 80% of the workforce. This shows to be ready for the future, to be relevant, you need to upskill your level so that you can have the greater skills. This slide shows about some statistics related to unemployment and employment population ratio in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, and in Rwanda. As you can see, the unemployment in Africa in 2022 is about 8%, and it will be 7% as projected in the next year. This will be a decline of 1%. On the employment population ratio, that is the ratio of the employed people by the total population, you can see that in Africa, today we are at 57.3%, and will be projected to the next year 57.8%. This shows we will have a great number, the increased number of people employed in Africa that goes with the decline, the decrease in unemployment. This is to tell youth, to tell workforce, despite this technology coming, emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, robotics, we will still have jobs that will be created in various sectors. What we need to have is the required skills so that we can be employed in those sectors. Let me talk about the future of work in Rwanda. Specifically, I'm referring to the National Skills Development and Employment Promotion Strategy that was adopted by the government of Rwanda in 2019. In that strategy, it said, the future of work in Rwanda will require a substantial improvement across 4 transversal skills. I think those skills are not only for Rwanda, not only for East Africa, for Central Africa, but all to all world. These include ICT, language, leadership, and soft skills. Let me go a bit in the digital skills that will be critical in Rwanda beyond the ICT sector. And these digital skills will create around 3 million jobs in 2013 compared to 1 million jobs created in 2016. Digital literacy itself will create over 1 million by 2013 from 400,000 in 2016. The hardware management will create around 700,000 jobs in 2013 from 300,000 jobs in 2016. Those are about jobs that will be created through digital skills as far as Rwanda labor market is concerned. A part of the digital skills, hard skills, soft skills will be increasingly demanded to complement the technical skills. Those include decision making, people management, service orientation, and emotion intelligence. You can ask yourself, which skills will secure jobs in the future? STEAM are very critical for the future to secure jobs. ICT and coding skills will be very critical. Language and soft skills, cognitive skills, as well as creativity skills. About Rwanda, what skills we will need in the future? First of all, we will need skills that will help our country to implement the Vision 2050, the one I said in introduction, where we want to become the upper income country. We need skills that will help our country in priority sectors. I mentioned some of the priority sectors, including the manufacturing, tourism, aviation, agro-processing, and so on and so forth. If anyone will have skills in those priority sectors, will secure a job in Rwanda in the future. Skills in emerging technology, in artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and so forth. For the sake of the future, I looked in the Future of Job survey done by the World Economic Forum and selected 20 job roles that will be increasing in demand and the other 20 that will be decreasing in demand across industries. As you can see, data analysts and scientists will be needed in the future. Artificial intelligence and machine learning specialists, big data specialists, digital marketing and strategy specialists. You can see a list of at least 20 job roles that will be increasing in the future. Others on the other side are some of roles that will be decreasing, data entry clerks, administrative and executive secretaries, accounting, bookkeeping, and so on and so forth. Those lists can show us where we can put much emphasis as Africa, much emphasis as in our country, so that our workforce be ready for the future. What about
Emmanuel?
Yes.
If you hear me? Yeah, if you could round up in about 30 seconds, and then that way we'll take the rest in terms of questions, so we have enough time for questions.
Okay, now let me at least say what countries can do, or even workforce can do, in order to make sure they are relevant for the future. We need to equip our people with specific skill set, the skills that will be needed in the future. Our young people, our workforce, will need to embrace the lifelong learning. This will be very critical in order to make sure we have qualified workforce in the future. Governments, private sector, and academia needs to have trainings that can help skilling, upskilling, and reskilling of the workforce. If countries, if employers, if academia, private sector can at least focus on those three important intervention can help our continent, our countries to position themselves in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Thank you very much. Rwanda, always impressive when it comes to planning and thinking about the future. Let me go to the audience. Charles is in the back. Emmanuel is online. Questions, comments? Yes, ma'am.
But my question will go to Charles Morito to see whether he can elaborate further on what this life learning means, actually, whether it is about focusing on soft skills like perseverance, flexibility, adaptability, and the likes, or what is the vision of Google on this one. And the second question goes around the second point that he touched on the creation of competitive spaces. What do you think is a role that development partners like GIZ can take actively to support the public and the private sector to create these competitive spaces in a sustainable manner? And I would like to emphasize the keyword of sustainability. Thank you.
Yes. Other questions? Yes, there's a hand there.
Thank you so much. My name is Eddie from Kenya. I think the two speakers have mentioned one point that is important, the involvement of the companies in training, because it's through this that the graduates coming from the vocational training institutions will have the right skills to allow them get these opportunities from the industries. My question is, how can we inspire the companies so that they actively work together with the vocational training institutions to support vocational training?
Okay, great. The lady and then.
Thank you very much. My name is Lena Harris Pomeroy. I work for GIZ in Senegal on labor law reform. And our main goal, or one of our project's goals, is to create more jobs, to try and support more people leaving the informal sector to get into the formal sector. And I'm asking myself, after all the inputs that I've heard today, and the challenges that we face also with infrastructure, lack of access to electricity, and then we talk about digitalization. My main question is, how can digitalization really be used to create more jobs? Which is, I don't know, maybe a basic question, but I want to go back to that because I really find that as a big challenge that we have. And I would just be interested in hearing the experts' opinions on this question. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lena. Final.
Thank you very much. My name is Shei Ogidiolu. I work with DTC Nigeria, Digital Transformation Center Nigeria. And well, a concern that will transform itself into a question is these stats are actually fearful, but then I think we'll see them as opportunities because the road to bridging this gap is quite huge, and everybody have to come on board and contribute a quota. But then I'm already seeing a gap being created. The laws of supply and demand is very critical in things so that we can always strike balance. What's happening presently is there are a few organizations in Nigeria that are very good at upskilling people. The dilemma is they create a supply and the local economies don't have capacity to demand for them. So these people inadvertently have to leave the shores to go to where those jobs are available. And that is a problem. So I will recommend a kind of approach that we need to build the skills, the capacity, but on the other side, we need to build the consumer side, the people who will consume the solutions these people create, the people who will employ these top earns, the people who would have the capacity to pay. For instance, in Nigeria, where I'm from, if you are into DevOps and you are a senior DevOps person, you would never take a full-time employment because no one really can pay you. So you're on contract and companies are at your mercy, technically speaking, and no one is getting the real value from these guys at the end of the chain. So my that comment is going to turn into a question of for our experts, what also do you see as the need of something we need to do about balancing that gap in between supply and demand?
Okay, great. So I think I'll let Charles take a first go, but Emmanuel, I hope you can hear us. There are some specific questions. Lifelong learning, what is what does Google see as lifelong learning? But also this question of kind of balancing the two things you talked about, human capital and competitive spaces. If there isn't a balance, then we are facilitating brain drain and not really having the human capital that we have developed contribute fully to the local economy.
So let me start with that second question that you posed around human capital and brain drain. I have perhaps a contrarian view about brain drain. People should go work where they can and make the most that they can make out of their skill sets and the opportunities. I think it will be very selfish of us to tell any one person, no, you need to stay in a particular place, yet someone else is trying to pay you more. So that's where governments, that's where DFIDs, that's where organizations such as ourselves come in, which is to create the right pipeline of skills. For instance, over the last 3.5 years, we've trained 80,000 developers in Africa from every single country on the continent. And previously we hadn't done Sudan, but as soon as the sanctions were lifted, we actually managed to do that. What we're now seeing is that the senior devs are lacking because we've trained a whole bunch of entry-level devs, but not enough, to the question that you raised. But then it goes back to the policy point around cross-border data flows. If Flutterwave, Paystack, etc., can only work in Nigeria, they cannot be able to raise the kind of funding that they require to be able to actually employ those senior devs that are required. So the world is becoming more connected. So we must start thinking about how do we create opportunities, not jobs in just one country, but opportunities so that when people learn a particular skill set, they can work while at home and service the rest of the world. And I want to give an example of Learning Lions in Lodwar here in Kenya. They're employing people, or they're training young high school graduates on very tangible jobs. And what they're doing is that those high school graduates, by the way, when I say high school graduates, what age comes to mind? 17, 18? No, they're 25, 26. Most of them have 1 or 2 children because going to school is not a priority in Lodwar, right? Fetching water for your animals is the #1 concern for people there, right? So we also need to understand the local nuances and understand how do you start servicing for that particular market that you're in. But what's happening is that with Safaricom granting some lower cost of data, They started off in a room like this, right? They now have a 100-acre campus, right, in Lodwar, training all these young people who then do jobs virtually. Those young people would probably be in Nairobi or in some other urban place, right, working hand to mouth. But the money goes so much further in Lodwar, right? So we need to figure out new ways of solving problems, which I think answers the question of how do companies and how do DFID such as yourself really collaborate together? It's really saying the way we used to do things may not always be the best way. How do we start thinking and really understanding the local nuances in a market? Start looking at the gaps in terms of the opportunities, right? As Emmanuel spoke about, for instance, AI and machine learning requires a lot of sampling and feeding data sets, right? That is something we can do in Lodwar, right? In Jamena, or in any part as long as there's connectivity, right? And there was a question about how do we get companies such as ourselves, Google, and the like to really contribute to both lifelong learning as well as other ways to drive incentivization for jobs, right? I'll give you two quick examples. One, in West Africa, we're landing a cable from Portugal down to Cape Town. We've landed in Togo, we're landing in Nigeria, followed by Namibia, and then eventually Cape Town, plus St. Helena. What that does is that one cable provides enough data as the previous cables are combined, and it's 20 times more capacity, right? What that should do is that by working with providing that data, the cost of data should come down. But then there's a question of electricity. That's where governments come in, right? Because we can't talk about access to the internet without thinking about electricity. We have to think about transportation. How do we provide simple things such as ensuring that connectivity from a policy perspective is critical infrastructure so that when someone just cuts a cable or a fiber maliciously, right, it's the same as doing something offensive, right? And there's punishment. So it needs and requires a cross collaboration of government, development organizations, private sector, academia, everyone has to come to the plate. And then I will give one last, I think there was one last question around, vocational trainings, critical, right? Just about 3 months ago, we announced that we're piloting something here in Kenya to train in 22 TVETs across the country, help develop trainers who can then train skill sets. And that's the way we must do it, right? We must start diffusing the knowledge and the dissemination of information to the most local spaces. So again, how can you guys help? I'm happy to engage with you. You can contribute to some of the many projects that we're doing because Google by itself cannot be able to cover the cost of what's required, right? In fact, what I keep saying is that we perhaps need to come together because Safaricom in Kenya is doing something, Equity Bank is doing something. We have Zenith Bank in Nigeria doing stuff, Access Bank is doing something, Glow, etc., etc. Everyone is doing their own small thing. What if we came together and started creating a North Star of what we need to deliver? And I'll give you an example just to close. ALG, which is run by Fred Swaneker, has a mission to deliver 8% of the workforce required over the next 30 years, right? That's 10 million jobs in terms of tech. Let me be specific, right? MasterCard has come on board and has helped fund that. But what if more organizations actually leveraged a platform like that or a system like that, that we institutionalize and create a proper program with checks and balances, and then be able to actually work towards a singular North Star, right? Because right now, I think what's happening is that everyone is doing many different things, but it's not coordinated. We don't have the right data beyond certain circles, etc. So we need to pull all our resources together, in my view, and do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. Emmanuel, I'm going to go to you online because you know, when Charles was sitting here thinking, 80% of the jobs on this continent are in the informal sector. And it's great to train senior developers who can work for companies from around the world. But if we don't somehow shift the economies on the ground, then we are going to be the world's workforce while we don't have electricity. You know, my country, Cameroon, we have 30,000 engineers that live in Germany. And we don't know how to, we can't build roads in the local government in my country. So it can't just be market oriented, because if we are just market oriented, then we simply, you know, provide labor and it's nice for those couple of families, but then what's happening locally? You know, we have to ask ourselves that question. So Emmanuel, I'm going to you because I know that Rwanda is one of these countries that thinks through its economy and plans its economy. How are you guys dealing with this question of bringing in informal sector workers to be able to upskill them, and also developing the competitive space that our colleague from Nigeria was talking about, so that you can absorb some of these workers?
Thank you very much. I think you can hear me. Okay. Yeah. Informal sector, informal workers constitute a big share of workers in Africa, in Rwanda, in many countries. As Rwanda, what we do for informal workers, for the informal sector, first of all, in order to address the issue of informal workers, you need to know them. You need to conduct a research, know who are in the informal sector, what are they working, what are they doing, what skills they have, what skills they need, what issue they have, so that you can ensure this smooth transition from the informal to formal. If you finish to know them, to do a research, you need to train them, upskill them, reskill them, because some of the issues that are persistent in the informal sector are related to the skills, are related to the quality of products. In that spirit, you need to make sure you are training them in order to have relevant skills. You are training them in order to produce quality products that can compete with the existing informal product, if I can call informal sector, or or you create an informal worker with skills that can compete with the skills of the formal worker. Now, after training them, you need to incentivize them. If they have the issue of the collateral, the issue of the capital, as the government, you need to provide some fund, create some funding, some guarantee to make sure those quality products you trained for, to make sure those skills you trained for are really having the fund to be operationalized. Those are the three important things you need to do if you want to make sure you are moving smoothly from the informal sector to the formal sector. Allow me to touch on the other question that asked about on what can be done to inspire the companies to support the vocation training. In Rwanda, we started what we call sector skills councils. Sector skills councils are forums that are meant to bring on board the employers, the companies, the company owners, the government and academia, and they discuss all the issues that impede the skills development. Through those sector skills councils, all issues are identified and the proposed solutions are proposed by the company owners, the employers, and it is easy to be implemented. In Rwanda, specifically in Employment Week that normally held between the 1st of May to the 7th of May, we recognize the companies that supported the vocation training, the companies that supported the hands-on skills of the workforce. Those two interventions are really helpful and are really working in order to make sure we are bringing the companies to support the vocation training. Lastly, I want to touch on this supply and demand balance. Actually, if we're talking about the labor market, we don't only say the demand side and the supply side. We need also to talk about the matching side. How do you match this supply and the demand side of the labor market? Here in Rwanda, we have like 4 interventions we do in order to make sure we are matching those 2 sides of the labor market. First of all is what we call evidence-based workforce planning program. We make sure what we are training is what is needed on the labor market. The number company X is needed in manufacturing X things is really corresponding to the number of what we are training, is really corresponding to the skills we are training. Number 2, we strengthen the career guidance and employment service program. If we want to match the demand and the supply side of the labor market, we need to make sure we are strengthening the career guidance, the employment services, how we link the job seekers and the companies, how we make sure we are training the job seeker to meet the need of the labor market. 3, what are the labor market transitions program we have to make sure if someone is graduated with enough theoretical parts, do we have programs like professional internship, industry attachment, workplace learning programs that can help that specific graduate to transition from the theoretical part he has to the practical skills that are needed to the labor market. In a nutshell, is what we call in the middle pillar, the middle pillar called matching, to make sure we are matching this supply and demand sides of the labor market. Thank you.
Time check. We are already at 5:45. Are you okay for us to take a last round of questions? Yes. Okay. So last round of questions, and then we'll give our speakers the opportunity to respond. Yes, sir. And then.
Thanks, Jacob, from the Global Project on Future of Work. We have talked about the skilling and the supply side very much now. Looking a little bit more into the demand side, Charles, you mentioned that the free flow of goods, people, and also data is very important. Can you also elaborate, maybe also the colleague from RDB, how data and the availability of data for governments is important for them to have or to make informed policy making to then support the private sector development in the countries?
Great. Yes. Oui, à vous la parole. Ah, okay. Madame.
Oh.
Go ahead. Go ahead. You have the mic.
Thank you. Faith from Jazz at Botswana. I have two questions. So we've spoken a lot about TVET and lifelong learning, but at least from my experience, we, as a child, like 18, that's when you decide what you're gonna do for the rest of your life. And sometimes you make a wrong decision. So what are we doing to teach the students while they're still 10 years or 12 years what the future jobs look like? Because ultimately we are still producing accountants, and no offense to accountants, and you know, skills which are depreciating in demand, and yet we're talking about having more data analysts and STEM jobs. So are we focusing so much on TVET and forgetting on these formative years, which will ultimately lead to the us having the skilled workforce in 2050 or 2100? And then the next question I have is, we've spoken a lot about jobs, but there's also digitalization itself. I know, Charles, you said you are not going to speak about technology adoption, but if you look around, especially like in rural areas, which is, I think, most of Africa, are we as Africans adopting technologies? Because ultimately, if we keep on upskilling our people, we'll just be servicing the first world, and we'll completely forget about our grandmothers and aunts who are still in the rural areas. So what can we do to make sure that the technologies that are developed, such as blockchain or data analytics, can actually benefit the mass population in Africa? I think those are my two questions.
Okay. Oui, deux questions derrière.
Thank you. My name is Ibran Doy, and I'm from Senegal. I want the speakers to elaborate a bit about digital transformation within public administration, because it has been a topical topic, and now is a time for e-administration in many countries, including mine. However, besides capacity and skills challenges, we have still some resistance. The mindset of people in the public administration maybe is not like that with the private sector. And we have procedures, tight procedures, long procedures, validation process that is taking sometimes, which is high considered in within public administration. So the question is, how can we make sure that everybody will be on board, including people, maybe middle-aged people in that are not ready for the change. Even though we know that one of the lessons learned from the COVID crisis is that we have to do things in another way. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Robert, and I'm working on a TVET project in GIZ in Senegal. And earlier today, we heard about the potential of agriculture in Africa. And when I'm thinking about agriculture, I'm thinking about low tech. But here we're talking about high tech, like artificial intelligence and blockchain. And how do you put these together? How can we put these together that really the rural workforce also it has an advantage of this technology? Because we also heard that the agriculture has to transform in order to be more productive and have a bigger impact on the value chain.
Great. Last, la dernière.
Thank you. Francis, de RDC. Vous m'excuserez, je parlerai en français.
No worries.
OK. En fait, ma question, c'est que dans notre expérience, notamment dans les appuis de la transformation digitale au sein des institutions financières, il s'est avéré un besoin de nouveaux métiers au sein même des institutions financières, mais en fait, en général, on ne trouve pas des personnes qualifiées. Ça crée des besoins, mais en face, il n'y a pas vraiment des répondants en termes de profil. Je ne sais pas s'il y a des expériences qu'on peut nous partager dans ce sens pour trouver des solutions.
D'accord. So the question is with regard specifically with regard to financial institutions. So the experience is that with the adoption of technology within financial institutions and putting into place fintech, the people who are able to do the work are just not there. And so the question, he's just asking for experience sharing on other countries. How have they addressed this? So a lot of really nice questions for for both of you. Number one, I think there are a couple of questions that have to do with government. So the importance of availability of data for governments. And I think, Emmanuel, you started to touch on that because you talked about knowing your informal sector and so on. But also digital transformation for public administration. I want to, as everybody was speaking, I thought of a little story. On my last trip before this one, I landed in Douala. I was approached by a young man as you know, we were filling out the forms for immigration, very timidly, you know, and I was like, well, you know, and he says, well, I don't know how to write, and could you help me to fill out my form? So I filled out his form. He had a passport. He was a trader. He was coming to Cameroon to do business. He was Malian. And on his passport, it was written Né Vert. So this is how my father's ID card looked like. I'm 57. My father is long gone. It was the olden days, they were not sure of your exact date of birth. So they wrote born around, and they put the date according to like oral testimony. This kid was born in 1994. He had a passport. It was written Né Vert, and he didn't know how to write. And this is very much our African reality as we talk about this other, you know, high tech and DevOps people and Flutter Wave and so on and so forth. You know, we have to think about how the technology, and I think what another element that I thought of as we looked at this conflict. You look at the conflict areas in Africa, they are the marginalized areas. One of the key elements in those areas is absence of government. Absence in the sense that people don't have ID cards. They are not citizens. They don't have identification which links them to that country. So digital transformation for governments, number one. Number two question, what are we teaching kids about what the future of jobs looks like? And fancy technology, AI and robotics and so on. What about technology for 80% of the people who are employed in farming? Voila. So, and then there was a specific question on financial institutions. So you want Emmanuel to go? Yeah, maybe Emmanuel, can you go first? On top of that, keep it to 2 to 3 minutes, and then I will come back to the room.
Okay, thank you very much, I think the availability for data is a shared concern at our continent, but Rwanda is trying his best to make sure he has available data a bit in as far as jobs, skills are concerned, and the other various areas. Let me start data concerning jobs and skills. Every quarter we conduct the labor force survey, which is the survey that is conducted to assess the employment and unemployment of the workforce by specifically focusing on the labor market indicators. I think on a quarterly basis and at annual basis, you can have the situation of the labor market as far as jobs and skills are concerned. We have a skills database that's updated also on a quarterly basis. The skills database, the database that shows the available skills in the country, saying graduates, the area of studies, where they work, and so on and so forth. But we know that we still have some gaps, and I think countries should put more emphasis in capacity building in data analytics, how we strengthen our data analytics in Africa, how we do the skills need assessment harmonized, how we do the skills and employment forecasting in our respective countries. Those are the key areas, the key that we need to focus on if we want really to advise our workforce on where to put efforts to be relevant in the future. About administrative data, digital transformation, I think a lot has been done in our country. We have Irembo platform. Irembo platform is where you can apply for all documents you want in the country, be it passports, be it certificate of birth, be it driving license. That platform has the data, the personal data that really anyone can use, be it a manual one to a given certificate, be it a manual wants a passport. You apply through that platform, Irembo, and you can get in 1 day, 2 days at maximum the requested certificate. That is an example of how we transformed our services to digital, where the interaction between the human being and human being is being reduced, where you can apply what you want through online. This requires internet, this requires electricity, and our country is doing its best so that we can have internet at full coverage at the country, and even electricity at the full coverage.
Can I ask you, Emmanuel? You were the wrong person to ask the question about government and data, because Rwanda is an outlier where that is concerned. But maybe you have a government that realizes this importance. How are you addressing the question of technology for rural workforce and adoption of technology by people who are not in the cities, who are not in the in Kigali?
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me say that first of all, we have in our education, not in rural, in the urban area in Kigali, but in all schools we have the program of 1 laptop per child. That is the starting point, at least for the kids. We make sure any kid can access the laptop at school with internet. Two, in rural area, in 2019, we had a program of giving phones, these smartphones, to farmers, to people in the rural area. It was a program chaired by the President of the Republic where we gave phones, smartphone to people in the rural areas. Suppose anyone in the rural area who is a farmer with who can cultivate maize, who can cultivate potatoes, but we make sure, since we have internet coverage around the country, at least he can access the smartphone to apply the basic services. That was the reason behind. At least we minimize the time spent by a person to apply a service to sector, a service to district, a service at a national level. At least he can use his or her smartphone with internet. He goes on Irembo, he can or she can apply for any services. That program of giving smartphones to rural areas, people had helped a lot in making sure this availability of online services, not only in Kigali, but also in rural areas.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I'm going to go to Charles to close up. Charles, if you have any comments on digital transformation in public administration, but more importantly, what kind of technology for rural settings and
By show of hands, how many of you care about technology? Care about technology? How many? You care about it? I don't. I work at Google. I don't care about technology because for me, technology is an enabler, right? So we shouldn't dwell too much about technology. What we should really care about is that, is it doing what it's supposed to do? Let me ask you another question. How many of you care about oxygen? How many of you have been thinking about oxygen today? None. You only care about it when it doesn't work. When you can't breathe, then you start choking. That's when you realize, I actually should care about oxygen. And that's the way technology should be. Technology only really matters when it doesn't work. It should be so fundamental to everything that we're doing that it's really inbuilt in terms of everything that we are starting to do, whether it's work. And the reason I'm asking this question is to your question about the young people and what are we doing with them from an early age. At the end of the day, that's why I give the example of my son. He is so adept to technology. I do realize that he's an outlier, right? He's not the average African child. He's grown up privileged and he will continue to be. But how do we ensure that technology and the ability to access that technology is really like air? That every single African child and every single child in the world, not just African child, can actually access technology in that same vein. So that when you're a doctor or you're an accountant, you still leverage technology to enable you to do the work that you need to do. The question around farming, and this is the blend between high tech and low tech. We must ingrain technology to farming and to the most perceived low tech areas of our economy. That was one of the pillars that I didn't discuss around adoption of technology. It has to be in every single sector of society. Whether you're thinking about tourism, for instance, right? African countries who rely on tourism, how can they embed the utility of technology to help them leverage and get people into the country, right? It may be seen as it's not the most technologically advanced sort of sector. The same around agriculture. Twigger Foods is doing something so incredible. They just posted it on LinkedIn a couple of weeks back, I think 2 weeks back. They're going to be the largest tomato farmers on the continent. This one company, how are they doing that? Leveraging technology, right? They have something like 900 acres under tomatoes, right? They're doing the same for watermelons, for onions, etc. So we must really infuse technology and the utility of technology in every sector of society, which brings me to the question of public sector. I hate to say it, and I'm going to call upon my colleague in Rwanda. You must mandate this, right? It's really about incentives. And that's how human beings are. You do what you're incentivized to do, right? And it's the, the old age of, demerits and credits, right? We must enforce the adoption of technology into public sector. And we must also be honest with ourselves and understand, why is there resistance to the adoption of technology, to the adoption of blockchain? If there's great tracking of every single deal that's been done due to blockchain, right? There's a lot of wastage that's going to go, right? So we must ensure that we're pushing this across the systems and be candid with ourselves. What are the motivators that are making this more rigid, and how do we ensure that we create motivators that enable that adoption of technology beyond that? And then the question, I hope I answered the question about school age kids, right? It's really infusing that. And curriculum-based or competency-based curriculums are fantastic, because what they're saying is, you do what you love. Passion is critical. And that's why I said, I don't care about technology. It's what it does for you. If you're a fashion designer and that's what you care about, how can you infuse technology into fashion design, right? Because tech cannot solve for some of that creativity, right? So let's think about that. Are Africans adopting technology? I think that's the question I answered. Digital transformation, public administration, I've answered that. Low tech, high tech, I think I've answered that. How do we, financial institutions, hopefully you'll get translation. In Rwanda, we're working with the Rwandan government on something called Moja Loop. Moja Loop is basically building rails so that financial institutions across the continent can be able to ride on these rails to deliver real-time payment services, right? So what we need to do is actually start leveraging skill sets. And I love your question, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel every single time. Moja Loop is actually, it's not a Google product. It's actually, it's open source, right? Google just happens to sit on the Moja Loop Foundation and a whole bunch of other organizations like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, et cetera, et cetera. But what's interesting is saying many countries in Africa do not have real-time payment platforms, right? Nigeria does, Kenya does, Rwanda is building it, right? A few other ones do. But if you tell Malawi to build an RTP platform, it's going to cost too much. How do you open source that? How do you ensure that we can leverage across each other's skill sets and also deliver a lot more open source technological adoption across the board, so that it lowers the cost of adoption and it scales a lot faster? And once you scale it a lot faster, more people will adopt. Which takes me to the rural piece, our grandparents. That's a question that really matters to me, and it's close to my heart. It's about creating products that solve a problem. Just a couple of weeks ago, we announced that we're going to open a product development center here in Nairobi for Africa. We're not creating it for Kenya, it's for Africa. And we're hiring engineers from all over Africa. It just happens to be based here. The reason for that is that we must be able to solve for the needs and the nuances of this continent, right? I love your example about the Mali teen or early 20s young man. The reality of it is that most of us in this room probably text more on WhatsApp. But do you know that WhatsApp voice is actually used more than texting, right? And that's where our grandmothers in rural areas love WhatsApp because they have the same level of communication as they would, but they deliver voice notes. They don't type. So how do we create products that really work for Africa? Because let's be candid, a lot of the products have just been transposed to the continent. But we now have to start creating products that work here. I hate using this example, but it's a good one. Everyone knows about it. So I'll go against my own rule of not using it. M-Pesa, right? Everyone talks about M-Pesa. Why did it take on? It's because if I'm sending money to my grandmother in the village and I would go to the bus station, put 200 shillings in an envelope, and by the time it gets to the village, it's either 0 or maybe 50 shillings, right? 75% gone. You tell me to send a text message and my grandmother gets exactly that same amount of money. You adopt. It works. It's probably the most rudimentary form of technology because it's trust and an SMS. That's what M-Pesa is, right? Most people who are probably sophisticated in terms of technological innovation will say, no, that's quite boring, but it works. So how do we create products that work for Africa? I'll pause there. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Let's give a big hand to both Emmanuel and Charles. Thank you both so much for leading our conversation very clearly. These people have been in rooms since 9 o'clock this morning, and they're still sitting here. They're very clearly interesting. Thanks a lot, and goodbye. And for the rest of us, dinner will start being served at 7 p.m. It is right downstairs. You go out the reception doors in the opposite direction towards the terrace, and you look on your right, you'll see a big white tent under which our dinner is going to be served as of 7 p.m. And it's a buffet, so you can take your time. It's not going to go anywhere. And see you tomorrow morning in the room, 8:55 Namibian time. Thank you.